Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's service of the Winchester Unitarian Society, a caring religious community devoted to spiritual growth, social transformation, and environmental responsibility. As a welcoming congregation, we affirm the full inclusion of people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Martin Newhouse, and I'm the worship associate for this morning's service. As Unitarian Universalists, our faith does not require us to believe in any particular dogma, tenet, or creed, and among us we believe many different things. We prize freedom of thought and open, honest discussion and questioning because these, we believe, enrich both our spiritual lives and our work in the community. Indeed, we can still today proudly state, as the first minister of this congregation, Richard Metcalf, did over 100 years ago, and I quote, "We do not regard even the best creed as final. We look for new truths and new statements of old ones. We maintain the unlimited right of free inquiry." But while our faith does not impose any dogma or creed or belief, we recognize that it does call upon us to do certain things. And among these, we recognize and affirm the inherent worth and dignity of all people. And in that spirit, we greet with joy and fellowship all who are gathered here this morning, even on Labor Day weekend, I'm happy to see. And we greet all who are here in person and online through streaming. We welcome you all. And now let's all take a moment and wave to those attending by the live stream. And for those of you who are joining us by live stream, please let us know who you are and what's on your mind by sending an email to checkingin@winchesteruu.org. There's one announcement this morning. On Sunday, September 10th, that's next Sunday, immediately after our water communion service, everyone is invited to a community potluck, which will be either outdoors or in Metcalf Hall, depending on the upcoming decision by our pandemic planning task force. Please bring your appetite and your favorite dish to share. And then I would add that any help with cleaning up after the potluck will be greatly appreciated. We all know that many hands make light work. This morning's service is the last of our lay-led summer services, and it promises to be a service of great interest and importance. Our service leader this morning is our own Allison Kirchgasser, and Allison's topic this morning, as you all know, is, quote, "Sexuality, Faith, and Self-Acceptance, Lessons from the Diaries of the First Modern Lesbian, Ann Lister." I, like the rest of you, eagerly look forward to hearing Allison's reflection. And for those who would like to discuss this morning's topic further, please join Allison for a discussion about her reflection, which will take place in the parlor back there around 11:30 after our usual Sunday reception after the service. And now, let us take a few moments to stand and greet each other. And now, let us open our hearts and minds to worship.
Our opening words come from Ann Lister's journal, Paris, 8th of September, 1822. At 11:30, went to our Protestant service, the duty well done. The clergyman read pretty well and gave us, in 19 minutes, a tolerable but to me uninteresting sermon on the subject of the excellence of our liturgy from Ephesians 9, verse 12. I am thoroughly convinced of the merits of our form of prayer, but somewhat tired of hearing them often repeated from the pulpit. Surely we might have been told something else to more advantage. I now invite my mother, Marjorie, and wife, Sally, to kindle our chalice.
From a letter written by Ann Lister on 8 November 1822. Why should we be somber? Though clouds and thick darkness do indeed surround us here, there is or ought to be a light within us that burns forever at the shrine of faith. Surely, this much is generally in our power, for the mind will strengthen itself by proper employment and will light us on our way with beams that set not in the western sky.
Please rise in body or in spirit to join in singing hymn number 200 in the gray hymnal, A Mighty Fortress.
Our first reading comes from Ann Lister's journal on the 29th of January, 1821. Arranging and putting away my last year's letters, looked over and burnt several very old ones from indifferent people, notes, etc. Burnt all Caroline Greenwood's foolish notes and Mr. Montague's farewell verses, that no trace of any man's admiration may remain. It is not meet for me. I love and only love the fairer sex, and thus beloved by them in turn, my heart revolts from any other love than theirs.
The time has now come for our joys and sorrows in the service. You are now invited to come forward, light a candle, and share a joy or sorrow that you carry within. And because this service is being live streamed, you will be able to access it both in the moment and as an archived recording. And if anyone wishes to have a candle brought to them, please raise your hand and we will make sure that happens. So I now invite anyone to come forward if they wish.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sheila. It's a joy and a sorrow. My sister, Marlene, in Edmonton, Canada, has just opened her home to refugees from Ukraine, and that makes me very happy. The sorrow, of course, is the situation in Ukraine.
Hi, I'm Allison, and I'm lighting a candle in memory of Ann Lister and in gratitude for all she's brought to my life, including a number of wonderful friends from around the world, many of whom are joining us today from elsewhere in the US, the UK, and the Netherlands. I'm also very thankful that my dear friend Kathy is with us today and that my mother and stepfather were able to travel from Northampton to also be with us.
Hi, I'm Sheila Rudolph Correa, and I'm lighting a candle of joy for Zareen, my dear friend, who many of you know, and she had surgery on Wednesday and is doing well.
Good morning. My name is Betsy Bowles, and I became a member of this church in the year 2000. My candle of joy today is for my friends and for the liberal faith that is shared by all of us in this great New England church. I was married here in the year 2004, which was also a joy. My concern is for all people of different preferences that cannot stand here or marry here or be accepted by folks like you. So that's my concern. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Fritzi Nace, and the Labor Day weekend is a very full weekend in my extended family with several different celebrations and the remembrance of a couple of passings of family members. So those are joys and sorrows that I'm carrying personally. We delivered both of our sons back to college, so that's also a joy and a sorrow. And I also, again, want to remark on the recent placement of a large number of Haitian families in Woburn, and our congregation is working towards organizing some ways that we can reach out and help. So I hope folks will look in the highlights for some of those opportunities. Thank you.
For those of you who don't know, I'm Bob Kennerson, and I was christened in this church. I saw aunts and uncles married from here, and my grandparents were buried from here. It's been a long and important aspect of my life, and I have a lot of I guess what a psychiatrist would call transference to this place. It's a wonderful sanctuary to come to. I've had a wonderful summer, some wonderful family events. My grandson graduated from WPI, and another son in March competed in World Cup skiing, all the way in Slovenia, and he won a bronze. So this is for 19 and under telemark skiing, and that was a wonderful moment for the family. And we had wonderful visitors from Switzerland. As you recall, Ruth was from Switzerland, very tied to her family. And there are now 120 descendants of her parents. She was one of 8 children, and there were 25 grandchildren, 4 of which were ours. In any case, we had 3 of the family come, great singers, and we were entertained very much by them. Am I taking too long? Anyway, excuse me. Anyway, on the sad side of life, well, I'll finish the visit. I went to the trouble to learn German during my many years, 50 years married to Ruth. And so they invited me to accompany them in some of their travels because there was only one of the 3 or 4 of them that spoke English. So we went up to my son's home in Sugar Hill, New Hampshire, where we had a very nice stay. So there's a lot of sprinkling of happiness still. Unfortunately, I still face surgery. It's been continuous in the 7 years that Ruth has been gone. We had a wonderful ceremony for here on the 3rd of September, 7 years ago, and it was very helpful to the family. Anyway, I've given a multitude of facts, but I'm very grateful for my life. I feel very lucky. I have excellent medical care, and I'm hopeful for a future.
I actually have one sorrow I want to share. I grew up in Durham, North Carolina. My family and friends are still there. And there was a scary shooting at UNC Chapel Hill last week. And a lot of my friends were, and my sister were in lockdown for hours, just not knowing. And it was very scary, and they're all okay. But it was just a scary moment. And so just wanted to share that. We'll now light one final candle for all the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken, but in our hearts. And after this, we will go into a moment of silence before heading into the second hymn, number 1007, from the Teal hymnal, There's a River Flowing in My Soul. I know my own heart, and I know my fellow men. I am not made like any of those I have seen. I venture to believe that I am not made like any of those who are in existence. If I am not better, at least I am different. Whether nature has acted rightly or wrongly in destroying the mold in which she cast me can only be decided after I have been read.
UUs don't normally proselytize, but I'm here today to spread the gospel of Ann Lister. I first learned about Ann Lister in the summer of 2019 when my wife Sally and I sat down to watch the joint BBC-HBO TV series Gentleman Jack, a show based on the real-life Ann Lister, which the television critic for the Washington Post had highly recommended. Ann Lister was born in 1791 in Halifax in West Yorkshire, England, and died in 1840 at the age of 49 when she was traveling in what is now the Republic of Georgia. She was raised in East Yorkshire, and at the age of 15 returned to Halifax to live with her father's siblings, her unmarried uncle and aunt, at the Lister ancestral home, Shibden Hall. We know about the details of Ann Lister's life because she left behind a 27-volume, 5-million-word diary. In this diary, she recorded the time she woke up, the time she went to bed, and everything that happened in between. Now, we don't know exactly what Ann Lister looked like, but this slide shows a posthumous portrait of Ann that hangs in Shibden Hall, also shown on this slide. Shibden was built in the 1400s, and the Listers began living there in the 1600s. The hall remained in the Lister family until 1933, when the last Lister died and the hall became a museum. Now, Ann is interesting for many reasons. She inherited the Shibden Hall estate from her uncle at a time when few women owned property. She was self-educated at a time when women could not attend college, and even managed to talk her way into lectures in Paris by some of the most esteemed scientists of the early 19th century. She was an avid traveler, spoke French, and was able to read many other languages, including Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. She was a mountaineer and was the first recorded person to climb Mount Vignemale in the Pyrenees. And she was a lesbian at a time when the word lesbian did not exist and when male homosexuality was criminalized. In fact, she wrote 1/6 of her diary in a secret code so that she could safely write about her many female partners. The code was eventually cracked by one of her descendants about 50 years after her death. Now, this slide shows a page from the diary, which includes samples of both of what she called her plain hand and her coded crypt hand. Television writer Sally Wainwright brilliantly used the diary for the major plot points in Gentleman Jack, often weaving in direct quotes. The first season of the show begins with 42-year-old Ann Lister returning home to Shibden Hall after yet another failed relationship and follows her life over the next 2 years as she attempts to make Shibden a more aristocratic estate, to dig a coal mine on Shibden's land while keeping her nefarious neighbors from stealing her coal, and to find herself a wife. Ann is brilliant, able to talk circles around anyone, well-read, energetic, funny, charming, and very romantic. It is easy to see why so many women were drawn to her. After watching Gentleman Jack, I was astounded that I'd never heard of this brilliant lesbian ancestor and immediately went online to learn everything I could about her. I soon discovered that the West Yorkshire Archive Service, which holds the Ann Lister diaries, was looking for volunteers to transcribe and decode the diaries. I became one of 180 volunteers from around the world who spent 2 years transcribing what Northwestern University Shakespeare scholar Professor Laurie Shannon, a fellow volunteer transcriber and convener of the recently launched Ann Lister Society, has called an emerging masterpiece of the English literary tradition. While portions of the diaries have been published by a handful of authors over the years, there was no complete publicly available transcript. It has been one of the great honors of my life to help make Ann Lister's writing accessible to the world. Now, there's so much to say about Ann Lister, but since we are in church, today I'm going to focus on her religious life. Anne was a devout member of the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church. She went to church most Sundays, walking from Shibden Hall down the narrow and steep old bank pictured in this slide, down the hill to the old church pictured on the left of this slide, which dates back to the 900s and was known as the Parish Church in Anne's time. This church, where Anne was baptized and buried, is known today as Halifax Minster and is still an active church. Anne would also sometimes leave her aunt and uncle off at the old church and continue on to the new church, pictured on the right side of this slide, which is no longer an active church. I haven't yet been able to figure out why she sometimes preferred the new church, as it's not clear whether that was due to the quality of the preaching or to the company that attended the new church. Now, the family was so devout that if they didn't attend church, Anne and her aunt and uncle would read both the morning and afternoon services at home. As she did with every other aspect of her life, Anne wrote in detail about attending church, often critiquing the delivery of the sermon. In rare instances, she was impressed with the quality of the delivery. In fact, on the 9th of August, 1818, the very day she mentioned singing Martin Luther's hymn, A Mighty Fortress, she had this to say about the sermon. Dr. Busfield preached an excellent sermon, 3/4 hour long, from the latter clause, chapter 5, verse 4, the first epistle of John. The style of the discourse was remarkably good, and the delivery of it admirable. I never heard so fine a preacher in my life. But more often, she had harsh criticism of the delivery. And I have to say, I'm a bit relieved that she's not here today to time and critique my sermon. From her journal on the 23rd of October, 1825. At 10:25, down the Old Bank to church. The curate did all the duty, preached 31 minutes, stupidly, very loudly, from 2 Kings 2, verses 23-24, got home at 1:20. On the 27th of October, 1822, she managed to insult both the minister and the congregation. We all went to church. The curate, Mr. James Knight, did all the duty and preached 35 minutes from Habakkuk 2, verse 4. An uninteresting, dull sermon to me, but one which might exceedingly suit the lower classes of the congregation, and what is quaintly, though improperly termed, the evangelical part of it. Got home at 1:25. My aunt and I read aloud the afternoon service, and I read aloud Sermon 6, Volume 1, my uncle's collection. And my favorite, on the 11th of January, 1835. 33 minutes in going to the church, yet Mr. Ackroyd, who did all the duty, only beginning as we entered the gallery. Preached 28 minutes from 2 Corinthians 10, verse 17. A sermon so tiresome, incoherent, and profitless that after the first 10 minutes, I had the good fortune to doze. In addition to often being harsh about the ministers of her own religion, she was not a fan of Unitarianism, as evidenced by these quotes. 12th of January, 1820. Long talk about religion brought on by my saying in reply, I thought Mr. Ralph a wise man for changing from Unitarian. The 10th of March, 1819. Mrs. Waterhouse received me very civilly, talking of Mr. Knight's father having been a collier employed both at Shibden and by the Walkers of Crow Nest, led us to religious subjects, and I was surprised to find Mrs. Waterhouse apparently much less tainted with Unitarian principles than I had supposed. In addition to attending church and reading the services at home, Anne also enjoyed researching religious questions for her friends and would often spend weeks pondering and researching before writing back her answers. She would also often recommend books on religion to friends. In a letter to the mother of her friend and ex-girlfriend Isabella, written on the 29th of January, 1823, Anne wrote, "By the way, will you give my love to Isabella and tell her she will find the following in Volume 2, page 76, Paley's Evidences of Christianity, speaking of our Savior. Some stain pollutes the morals of almost every other teacher and of every other lawgiver." Now, one of the things I find most inspiring and courageous about Anne was how she was able to reconcile her faith with her sexuality at a time when male homosexuality was considered a sin and was punishable by death, and when female homosexuality, or really female sexuality of any kind, was not thought to exist. Anne knew she was different and called her difference her oddity. In fact, one of the reasons she sought out the great scientists in Paris, including anatomist and paleontologist Georges Cuvier, was to try to understand the human body and mind enough to explain the oddity. And she did sometimes feel badly when people stared at or talked about her. From her journal on the 19th of June, 1824. Speaking of my oddity, Mrs. Priestley said she always told people I was natural, but she thought nature was an odd freak when she made me. I looked significantly and replied the remark was fair and just and true. On the 15th of December, 1823, she wrote, "Miss Crompton observed it was very good in me to call on them first. They had seen me walk past on Sunday. I had then my cloth pelisse on, and all the people stared at me." Mariana, now she was one of Anne's longtime partners and the source of much heartache. Mariana owned afterward she had observed and felt uncomfortable. This morning I wore my velvet spencer and a neat frill over my cravat. I must manage my appearance and figure differently. And on the 10th of February, 1829, she wrote, "The people stared at my greatcoat and hat, taking me for a man. Annoyed me a little." But she was also very comfortable in her unique identity. She included the quote from Rousseau's Confessions, our second reading today, in her journal on the 20th of August, 1823, in the original French. She clearly identified with this part of the quote. "I venture to believe I am not made like any of those who are in existence. If I'm not better, at least I am different. Whether nature has acted rightly or wrongly in destroying the mold in which she cast me can only be decided after I have been read." Now, the first reading from Anne's diary of the 29th of January, 1821, beautifully shows that Anne knew exactly who she was, and she believed her nature was exactly how her God intended her to be. "I love and only love the fairer sex, and thus, beloved by them in turn, my heart revolts from any other love than theirs." Sadly, many of her partners did not feel the same way. On the 13th of November, 1816, Anne wrote in her diary about the woman she was seeing. She asked if I thought the thing wrong and if it was forbidden in the Bible. I urged in my own defense the strength of natural feeling and instinct, for so I might call it, as I had always had the same turn from infancy, that it had been made known to me as it were by intuition, that I had never varied and no effort on my part had been able to counteract it, that the girls liked me and had always liked me, that I had never been refused by anyone. On the 27th of November, 1832, she wrote of the woman she was wooing, Anne Walker. Appealed to her reason and put my arguments on the basis of religion. She seemed rather inclined towards me at last, had doubted that we should suit. She had doubted whether it was right to engage herself to me. If this sort of thing was so bad between two men, it must be so. I answered this in my usual way. It was my natural and undeviating feeling, etc., etc. She seemed better satisfied. Now, although Anne Lister seems to have calmed Anne Walker's fears after that conversation, on the 8th of January, 1833, she received a note from Anne Walker, who clearly was still struggling with feeling that her love for Anne Lister was sinful, and who had told Anne Lister the night before that she couldn't continue in their relationship. And this is the note. "When I left you this morning, I little thought how soon I should take up my pen. I do it as a last hope and in utter misery. What I said last night I bitterly repent. My promise was made from a bad motive, from a want of confidence in God. It is this that is the source of all my misery and wretchedness. It is not only death in this world, but a far worse death that I fear. I wanted to tell you this today, but I could not. I dare not wait till tomorrow, for every hour is of consequence. If ever the prayers of so true a friend may avail for another, may yours be heard for me this night, that the gate of mercy may not be forever closed upon me, for I am wretchedness itself." Anne Walker. Now, I want to note that given the importance of religion in her life, not only was Anne Lister looking for a woman willing to commit to her for life, she also believed that her marriage should take place in a church. On the 14th of December, 1832, she wrote in her journal about Anne Walker. "I insinuated first time that our present intercourse without any tie between us must be as wrong as any other transient connection. She seems to think refusing me is refusing her best chance of happiness and is more likely than ever to accept me." And later that day she wrote, "Miss Walker told me if she said yes, it should be binding. It should be the same as a marriage, and she would give me no cause to be jealous. Made no objection to what I proposed, that is, her declaring it on the Bible and taking the sacrament with me at Shibden or Lightcliff Church. We now seem quite as likely as ever to get together. Am I foolish to risk it again?" Spoiler alert for the ending of season 1 of Gentleman Jack. After years of heartache and losing many of her prior partners, including Mariana, to marriages with men to ensure their financial survival and societal approval, Anne Lister finally found a partner who was brave enough to commit to her. Anne Walker, the very woman who wrote that she was wretchedness itself due to what Anne Lister termed her religious despondency, who had been infatuated with Anne Lister since she was a teenager and was in love with her as an adult, agreed to solemnize their union by taking the sacrament of communion together in church. On the 30th of March, 1834, Anne Lister and Anne Walker took communion together in the Holy Trinity Church at Goodham Gate in York, pictured on this slide. A blue historical plaque commemorates the occasion, considered to be the first recorded same-sex union in the United Kingdom. And since she was the one who recorded the occasion and so much of her life as a lesbian in her journal, Ann Lister was dubbed by historian Richter Norton in a 2003 article as the first modern lesbian. Since learning of her story, people all over the world have been inspired by Ann Lister's courage and her belief that she was made just as nature and her God intended her to be. And those people include me. In April of 2022, I made my first Ann Lister pilgrimage to Halifax to attend the first annual Ann Lister Birthday Week celebrations and Ann Lister Society meeting, and was thrilled that my mother was able to join me. Mom and I visited Shibden Hall, the church in York where the Anns took the sacrament together, and most moving for me, visited the Calderdale branch of the West Yorkshire Archives Service to see the actual diaries that I had been transcribing from PDFs posted on the Archives website. It was incredibly moving to see the journals and Ann's handwriting in person. I was also able to meet many of my transcriber and other Ann Lister enthusiast friends from around the world in person for the first time. In July 2022, I made my second pilgrimage, this time with Sally, which included a trip to Wales to climb Mount Snowdon, which was really more like a walk up the mountain, with 3 other transcribers, and we were very happy to be joined by Sally Wainwright, without whom I may never would have heard of Ann Lister, and her friend mosaic artist Becky Payton. Our group climbed the mountain exactly 200 years to the day after Anne climbed it with her Aunt Anne, so we read the diary page about their excursion before setting off on our own. More recently, I attended the 2023 birthday week this past April, when I was thrilled to meet 92-year-old Helena Whitbread, whose 1988 book, I Know My Own Heart, you may recognize the title from the Rousseau quote that meant so much to Anne, brought Ann Lister out of the closet, as hers was the first book to reveal what was in the coded sections of the journal. Next week, I leave for my 4th pilgrimage, where I will join other transcriber friends for a private tour of Shibden Hall, a visit to the archives, and I'm sure we will explore many other Ann Lister-related sites. I've learned so much, traveled so much, have made deep and lasting friendships, and walk a little taller since learning about Ann Lister. I'm truly grateful for the gifts that Ann Lister has brought to my life, and I hope that the next time you are facing a challenging situation or questioning your place in the world, you will think, what would Ann Lister do? And live your life as courageously and authentically as she lived hers. The sermon was delivered in 17 minutes, tolerable.
Thank you, Allison. We now come to the part of our service where we ask people to give us money. One hope for goal of this church is to encourage all who gather here to grow more generous in spirit and in action. This indeed is the great end of all the world's faith traditions, to bring we human beings closer to the divine by acts of creation, generosity, and compassion. And we are now asked to make an offering that allows us to exercise that all-important generosity of spirit, an offering that will help to support this self-supporting church and its many ministries. And I must say that this service and Allison's sermon, Bob Kennerson's talk to us, all makes me think, how could we not support this church? There are different ways you can donate. Those in the sanctuary may give cash or checks or donate electronically. There is a number that you can text. I believe it's in the order of service, and you can text a contribution to that site, or you can visit the church's website and go to the giving page. And if you are visiting us for the first time, either in person or online, consider yourselves to be our guest. In-person attendees can find a physical visitor card in the pew rack in front of you. If you're sitting in the front row, it'll be in the pew rack behind you. Please complete it and put it in the collection plate, and that'll be your offering to us today. Information about how to give online and how to complete the virtual visitor card will soon be shared with live screen attendees through text on your screen. The offering, this morning's offering, will now be generously given and gratefully received. Those who wish to do so are invited to join in the unison affirmation that is in your order of service. We gather not for ourselves alone, but to use our common power to build the beloved community within and beyond these walls. We create and reaffirm this covenant this day to make justice flourish, to practice compassion amidst difference, and to embody transformative love. And now please rise in body or in spirit to join in singing Psalm 84, set to St. Anne, which you will find as an insert in your order of service.
You can all be seated. Sorry. And no surprise, but our closing words come from Ann Lister, from a letter written by her on the 23rd of February, 1824. But you tell me I am a character. It may be so, yet I am happy in myself and never wish to change a state with anyone. Our service has ended. Go in peace, and as Ann Lister would say, have a very fine day.
Please read together the words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. The service has ended, but our life of service continues. Please join us for coffee hour, which will then be followed by a post-service discussion at 10:30 in the parlor. And if you'd like to join the discussion online, please use the link at the end of the order of service.